This is Mission Qualfon, a monthly podcast that takes you inside the workings of our company, but not just the ins and outs of business. We look at the ideas and insights that make Qualfon truly unique. As a company, we are committed to being the best and making each person's life better. Join us as we get to know and learn from people from across the organization. What's their story? What have they learned? And how do they live out Qualfon's mission? Welcome to Mission Qualfon.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Mission Qualfon Podcast. Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, Marisol. This is number 37. I made sure and checked before we started because I knew you would ask. We're on episode number 37.
I'm looking forward to this one. This is someone who makes me cackle, and that is rare. I'm not a cackler by nature. You've heard me cackle at his stories, so I'm looking forward to this podcast because I hope that we can share the energy behind our guests.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Doug's a great guy to work with. We'll be talking with Doug Wells, who is our Chief Operating Officer, CES. And so we will ask him what CES means when we get to that.
And we should mention he's recently promoted, which I think is fun. If you have listened to all our podcasts, you've listened to Summer Dennis. She was on an earlier episode this season. Did I tell you the story, Jeremy, when I was on vacation?
I don't think so.
Tropics for 7 days. I come back and I have the message in my inbox of Summer Dennis's retirement. And she's not. I think we're close in age, and that was hard. That was a hard comeback from vacation.
People your age are retiring.
I was thrilled for her.
Yeah.
I was thrilled for her. I was excited for her, but it was hard to come back from vacation to that knowledge. But in that, we had this huge kind of restructuring that happened. And I'm not saying that precipitated, but we had acquisitions, we growing a lot of different businesses, and we had a restructuring. And our guest today was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. So that's exciting. And we get to talk about that.
Yeah, it is exciting. And I've had the opportunity to work with Doug. We were just joking before we started how we're taking up so much of his time. I'm taking up a lot of his time this week because obviously he's joining us for the podcast interview. He's also on our QML for this month, and he's super busy anyways. And so we're just piling this extra stuff into his schedule, but he's being a good sport about it. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. So without any further ado, let's bring on Doug Wells, who is our Chief Operating Officer for CES.
Thank you, Jeremy and Marisol. Couldn't be happier to be here.
The first question I have for you, Doug, is explain to us what CES is. You've got those initials after your title, Chief Operating Officer, CES. What is CES?
Jeremy, great question. So CES stands for Customer Experience Solutions. Said differently, or in layman's term, that's a very fancy term for our call center capabilities and technology that we use to service our clients. So on one side of our business, you have our MS, or marketing solutions, which are print, fulfillment, kitting, digital solutions, et cetera, versus on the other side of the house, the CES, or Customer Experience Solution, is our call center capabilities.
Well, Doug, thank you for joining us on the podcast, first of all, and welcome. And congratulations, because you recently just got a very big promotion, COO. But your journey actually started on the phones, which is, I know Jeremy and I, is one of our favorite things to tell that story. So could you tell us how you ended up becoming COO?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Marisol and Jeremy, for letting me join. And yes, sort of unique. In February of 1995, just out of college, my first job was as a call center agent for ironically, one of the largest telecommunications provider in the world, and really got an opportunity to cut my teeth in the industry, sort of learn the basics. And really from there, had an opportunity to grow into several other capabilities and roles, including, runs the gambit, but I was a quality analyst, I was a trainer, I was a team lead, and then a supervisor during that initial probably 3 or 4 years of my career. So really got the opportunity, to really learn the craft and what it takes to be successful in the industry.
I think anyone who worked in this industry, at least in the States in the 90s, probably worked for the same telecom companies.
You're probably right.
You and I have off mic have shared, I don't want to call them war stories, but they're, just stories of being in operations, working in operations. I've mentioned before that you crack me up, you make me laugh, and I always wonder what it would be like to work in your department, because that is a different energy than I came up with in operations, which was everything's on fire and, common bleeding ulcers were a common theme in my life. So with that vast history, with coming up from agent all the way up, what is something you would want to tell a new hire agent today who, let's give the background that they don't have a particular vocation in mind, they don't really know what they want to do, it's for a career for the rest of their life. How can they envision a future like the one you had, which is unique, but also can happen in this industry?
Great question. And there's really 2 pieces of advice I would offer. The first and foremost that I would tell any agent coming up is what I recall vividly during that time period is saying yes a lot. And what do I mean by that? Meaning every time I was asked, hey, would you be willing to work some overtime? Would you be willing to take on this different shift? We have this small project. It may only last a week, but we'd like to see if you'd be willing to help. So I always look for opportunities where anytime I felt like there was an opportunity for growth, to learn something I didn't already know, I would jump at the chance. So that would be the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice, and I actually ironically talked about this on our recent QML 44 that we had for the team, and it's to find a mentor. What I learned quickly is there were people ahead of me who had come in, had started to gain opportunities, and I really wanted to learn from them. And I actively sought out a mentor, someone I could go to for advice. What do you think about this? How should I approach this? And just sought a source of constant feedback. And if I were going to offer any advice to an upcoming agent, it would be those 2 things.
Doug, let me ask a little follow-up on the mentorship, because you mentioned on the recent QML, but if you remember, like a year ago, you joined us on the QML also, and we were talking about total vocation, and mentorship was a big part of that conversation. So obviously mentorship is something that you feel is important, that you're passionate about. I want to ask about the other side, about being a mentor to others. I was going to say younger agents, but they don't necessarily have to be younger. Often the people that we mentor are younger, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on being a mentor.
Can I jump in on Jeremy's question too? And can you tell us about mentors you've had?
I can do both. So why don't we start with the mentors I've had? Ironically, I've had 2 that stand out in my, dating myself 26 years in the call center / BPO space. Ironically, they were both named Doug. I had a gentleman by the name of Doug Charles early on in my career. Like I was an operations manager, and he really pushed me to learn something I didn't already have, and it was more on the technology side. And his whole thought process was to be a truly well-rounded leader, you needed to have both people, process, and technology. And with that, he really pushed me into an area that I was uncomfortable with, but he saw the opportunity and I was willing to learn. And that was a pivotal step for me in my career. Fast forward to just a couple of years ago when I initially joined Dialogue Direct / Qualfon and met up with another Doug Kearney, who's our current president. And one of the most interesting things about that was, again, the same theme applied, which is I always want you to be pushing yourself to learn something, not be afraid to make mistakes. And I've made the joke numerous times, but I always felt that Doug Kearney was only comfortable when I am uncomfortable. And though a difficult or challenging lesson to learn, I found it has really served me well and really forces me to think about problems from a very different perspective.
Let me jump in here real quick. We throw these terms around because it's like inside baseball, right? We talk about QML. QML is our monthly leadership training that takes place. QML stands for Qualfon Mission Leader. I mentioned earlier that, Doug, you were part of QML 44, our last one, and you were part of one about a year ago as well that I mentioned earlier. But let's talk about you being a mentor. So the other side of this coin, and just another reminder, we here at Qualfon have our 3 dimensions of leadership, and that is mentor, manager, and messenger. And we talk about those 3 things a lot. So I'm asking you, Doug, to kind of drill into the mentor piece and specifically about you being a mentor to others.
Yeah, it's if there's one thing I've learned along the way, having great mentors, is the just extreme satisfaction in when you realize and learn to become a mentor, especially for those who are clearly on an upward ascent and want to have an upward ascent in their career, who you see are motivated, want to do the right thing, and sort of hunger for that or thirst for that. How do I learn? How, give me feedback. And what I've learned at this point, after 26 years of being in the BPO industry, is what better thing that you could do than help develop the future leaders of our company, focusing on the mission, how they themselves eventually will become a mentor. And as you said, Jeremy, are a big part of being a messenger. So the satisfaction and frankly, just the obvious desire for those folks to take that next step makes it really an easy choice. But I think we should all strive to sort of take that step the further along in our career that we achieve.
So Doug, for me, this is like a personal question from someone with a background in operations. How do you use humor? Because you make me, like I've said this before, you make me cackle, and I'm not a cackler. So I would be really interested in learning how you use humor and how you manage your operational team.
I guess that's one of those things learned over time. But, here's the way I've always looked at it is we work incredibly hard in this industry. It's a tough industry. Things change by the hour, by the minute. You a lot of times can work long hours. And, I definitely subscribe to the adage, work hard, play hard. And if you can't have some fun at work, you just wonder if, as a leader, if you feel like, or you come across as if you're miserable, how do you think your team's going to be? And I have always tried, you have that brief interlude a lot of times when you're joining conference calls all day long. You have that 2 or 3 minutes while you're waiting for everyone to join. I frankly look for any opportunity, people just mentioning minute things about what's going on in their life or their day, and try to jump on those to add commentary. I look at it as my role to keep levity in the situation. I've got endless stories that I've had from my experiences, and I try to always relate to those. I've mentioned to you before, Marisol, that when I retire someday way down the future, I'm absolutely going to write a book, because the amount of stories we all have run across in this industry is just simply countless.
Oh, you and I both. I don't know if I'm going to write the stories or if I'm just going to use it as a setting, because you just think it offers a cornucopia of scenarios for anyone who would want to write a book. Saying all that, something that wasn't my experience in the BPO industry before coming to Qualfon was the mission. Every company I worked for in the past, and I don't say this in a negative way, it includes my own family company. It was for profit. There was one goal. It was to do well for our clients and get new business and build new business to make money. This was my first, I'll speak for myself, experience where I went to work for a company that had a greater call, a greater mission. And it took me a while to actually believe it. Like, I was very cynical about it. And I think I've mentioned that in previous podcasts. This is a hard industry. It's churn and burn. There's a lot of turnover. It could be very easy in many departments to think of people as just a number or a transaction. And I find myself at the end of my career here at Qualfon just kind of like, wow, I couldn't have envisioned this for myself 20 some years ago. So I'm wondering for you, now in your new position as COO and everything, what does the mission mean to you?
That's a really good question. And what I would say, Marisol, is the best way I can answer it is I remember vividly about 3 years ago when, as Dialogue Direct, we were being acquired by Qualfon. And I remember Alfonso Sr., I remember Mike Morrow coming to Highland Park, which was our headquarters in Michigan for Dialogue Direct, and really spending the time to walk us through the mission, what it meant, the things that they were doing, the things they wanted to do, and really emphasizing the importance of that. And that was the overriding sort of, a focus of the company. And I can tell you again, I'm going to steal your term, after 26 years in the industry, it's easy to have a bit of cynicism. What I heard sounded fantastic, but obviously early on, my first thought was, that sounds great, but is that really what happens? And here's what I can tell you. Unequivocally, the mission is real. I got to see it over and over. Countless examples of, we've had floods in the Philippines. We've literally had an agent whose home burned down. That the mission, with the leadership of Roberto and his just wonderful team, setting things up in order to help these people internally. What I saw, not just money, but people who not necessarily had lots of money to give, but offered their time. They offered their own PTO. Just incredible. And, the most latest example I can give is at the start of the pandemic. We migrated 8,000 agents into a work-at-home setting over a 3-week period. And it really was to accomplish a couple of things. One, the most important, employee safety, to make sure our employees were safe. Number two, to make sure we took care of our customers. They still had a business to serve, and we wanted to make sure we served their end customer. But yet at the same time, again, the mission team, we put together a COVID fund, and this was literally to help our internal family members of Qualfon who were impacted by COVID, who lost family members, who were sick, whatever the impact was. We were able to help those people through the fund and donations of internal employees. And again, that just emphasizes for me the mission is real.
Doug, what is it that excites you about coming to work in the morning? What do you look forward to every day as you come to work?
That is a great question, Jeremy. I've been asked that before, and it's evolved. What gets me up today is truly this. The only reason that I actually received my recent promotion is because of the incredible team that I have. They make coming to work every day, just one, fun, an adventure. They challenge me, they push me, they ask great questions. They're always looking to do more. And the most important thing, and if you ask any of my team members, sort of what are some of my pet peeves or sort of, driving thoughts, and it's really two things. One is you build trust as a team, and that allows us to share things that may be even difficult for us to improve. And then we work together as a team. And what's the old adage? Good news fast and bad news faster. When you build trust within a team, people will bring you those issues. They're not going to hide them. They're going to talk about them openly, and we develop solutions. And frankly, working with a team like that, that's what gets me up in the morning every day, hoping there's just one opportunity I can be a mentor for them. And I'm sure many times they're also still a mentor for me. So that's what really gets me up in the morning.
Doug, you mentioned with your mentors, I don't know if you use these exact words, but you basically said that you were safe to fail, right? You were safe to make mistakes because that's how we learn and we grow. So I wonder how important that is to you, this idea of allowing folks to make decisions, even if those decisions aren't always the best. But how important is it for us to learn from our mistakes like that?
It's one of the essence of really being a good leader. one of the biggest challenges I had earlier in my career, Jeremy, and it was on one of my reviews, was that I did not delegate well, ever. I was always fearful that if something, oh my goodness, if this doesn't go right, has my name on it. I can't allow this. I can't. And what I realized as I continued on through my career, if you're truly developing your team, you need to allow them to make those decisions. Doesn't mean you let them walk off into the forest without a map, but you, at the same time, you do let them make those decisions. And almost always, invariably, what I saw was there was good reasoning. And what I found is when people do mistakes, but they can show you, hey, this was the judgment, this is what was known at the time, and this is why I made that decision, is invariably what I usually found was there was a good reason for that. And, things changed and it was okay. And we would talk through and say, okay, how do we avoid that in the future? Or more importantly, how do we do better in the future? And when I found when you have that conversation versus banging your shoe on the desk, telling them, how poorly they did, that's how you go back to what I mentioned earlier, building that trust. And your team they're going to learn, they're going to continue to develop. And, for me, that's a critical part of being a leader.
So Doug, I think we're around the same age. And you've mentioned a few times 26 years of experience, which kind of hurts my heart every time you say it because it makes me feel my age. But I do have a question. I find myself looking back a lot lately because now we have data. We have a history to look back on our career and look at decisions I made and what I would have done differently or done the same. So this is not an original question, but what would you, if you could go back to that agent that started on the phone, knowing where you end up now, what would you say to that young man?
Oh, goodness. Well, that young man was definitely a different person, to be sure. But if there would be anything I would tell Doug, and I hate to say it at the age of 22, would be patience. Learn patience. I was not a patient person. And I'm sure there were numerous times where that lack of patience was obvious, probably to some of my peers or those I reported to, et cetera. And knowing what I know now, if you do the right things, if you, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, if you say yes a lot to opportunities and projects and be willing to, change your shift or take on a project, those things will happen. All the things that you want to achieve, those will happen. You have to let them happen. Don't have such anxiety. The next step, though it's great, it's not the end of the journey. The end of the journey is learning to become a better leader, a better manager, ultimately someone with the mission and being a good messenger. So the number one piece of advice I would have given 26 years ago is patience.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Thanks all.
Okay, see you.
Bye.
All right, Jerry. The funny thing about this is we couldn't really share how funny Doug was on the podcast because all the stories that he and I were exchanging, he and I had to edit out later.
Yeah.
They were hilariously funny, but not appropriate for our business podcast. But trust us, if you ever have the opportunity to work for Doug Wells or be on his team, you will get to enjoy a wicked sense of humor that makes work just a little more fun. Well, thank you again for listening. We truly appreciate it. Did you see that email I sent you, Jeremy? We had a big spike in our numbers again, and I couldn't be more thrilled. So Thank you, everyone who chooses to listen to us. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. That really does help the algorithm, and we appreciate it. Thank you. See you in a few weeks.
Bye, Marisol.
Bye, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Qualfon. Remember, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Mission Qualfon.